Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder, to the tank review on the Leclerc, which is currently one of two rank 7 battle rating 10.0 vehicles within the French tech tree, alongside the Roland 1, which is a SPA. Now, the question ultimately is this tank worth it? Is it any good? How do you play it? And is it fun? And this is where I have to bring a little bit of a subjective opinion into this discussion right from the start. I personally like this tank and I had some fun in it. I had some very nice gameplay in quick succession, and that is for me personally always a good sign that the tank fits the meta. If that is really the case, we'll see later on in a full rundown on the statistics and a major comparison to all the other main battle tanks of the other nations. But in a nutshell, I think that this tank, much like the MX-40 here at battle rating 9.7, just focuses on being a main battle tank and just, kind of delivering the quintessence of what is needed, and not so much focusing on stuff that maybe is good, maybe can make the difference. But this one is much like the Leclerc, delivering a little bit of a nasty stock grind. More on this in a moment. So we will have to focus on the firepower, the mobility, and as usual, I want to begin with a look at the armor. When we bring the armor protection of this tank into a nutshell, it is best described as not really that significant and existing, and it just isn't the same as a Leopard 2A5 or an Abrams. Therefore, no, it just focuses more on delivering some sections that are really difficult to penetrate by even APFSDS or HeatFS, but the most parts of this tank are paper. But it's a funny bag of kind of individual armor layouts, and this is what I try to explain. So first of all, the rolled homogeneous armor plating here, angled back at nearly 40 degrees of 50 millimeters thickness, is all that there is. It's not the cover plating of some Era composite protection or Nera composite protection. That's in fact all that you have. Even a lot of SPAs and IFVs will punch right through there. And then this block with 40 millimeters is in fact the cover plate of some Nera protection that can stop almost any APFSDS in the game, except from itself and the Ariete currently. Then this part here is 25 millimeters thin, but has a hefty angle of 77 degrees. However, it is not face hardened, and so then, despite there being below some Nera protection, all APFSDS will go right through and not just firstly get into your gun breech and the turret ring, to which we'll come just in a moment. Then the sight is here with 80 millimeters and some 10 millimeter and 8 millimeter spaced armor above some 30 millimeter and 20 millimeter armor plating. So the sight is pretty weak and maybe even hash safe. Maybe this will screw a little bit with some heat penetrations, but that's about it. Do not angle the hull, much like any other main battle tank in the game. Rear is weak, even 10 millimeters thin, so 50 cals can actually stop from the back your engine. And even from the top, only 5 millimeters and 20 millimeters, as well as 20 millimeters here over this rear turret ammo rack. And here on top we have 30 millimeter and 25 millimeter plates and some 40 and 20 millimeter plates. So this is rather thin, and a lot of the HE shells or even some heat missiles will punch right through there only with the explosion. So that is also not that nice. Then we also have this 50 millimeter turret ring, and that's really all that there is in terms of protection. Now, if we go here to the front, we can see that the armor is relatively thin, with 45 millimeters here and here, and you might be forgiven that there is everywhere Nera protection behind it. And in fact, there is, much like here, a lot of Nera on the protection of the side here and here, and that makes this turret side armor relatively tough to penetrate, even here. However, then the gun breech block, or the gun mantlet, that's only 45 millimeters. That's not even spaced armor. That's all there is. So SPAs and IFVs will punch clean through there, very often even with their stock ammunition. That is a huge weakness. And again, It just amplifies the main battle tank concept in War Thunder. It's all about taking the gun breach and then you're done anyways, but a lucky shot here or here will be absorbed without trouble from most tanks. Then we have a little bit of fuel tanks here and here that also can screw with HESH shells and even heat shells, much like here a little bit of the side protection, and that will stop some weaker shots. Then we will come to the placement of the crew, and in fact we only have 3 crewmen: the driver, the gunner, and the commander, much like in a Russian main battle tank. And then we have also behind this fuel tank a hull ammo rack, and you can take out all the shells and then the hull is basically empty, and the rest of the shells is here in this first stage ammo storage, and you can overall load 23 rounds of ammunition, which is mostly enough for a battle, and then ammunition is only here. So the funny thing is, despite only having 3 crew, despite having here no protection, a shot in the lower glacis is not necessarily fatal if it is delivered by a heat shell or an APFSDS round. Why? Because the shrapnelation, or the shrapnels, if you will, sorry about this, is actually very often not strong enough to kill anybody aside from the driver, and if the ammo rack is empty here, then there are no shells to ignite. So the APFSDS will go right through the tank, maybe set it on fire, and maybe take out the engine, depending on the angle, but only injuring here the feet of the commander and the gunner, because they are sitting relatively high up in the turret. And in theory this should also be kind of a blowout panel, but so far that has not worked with me, and I also didn't test this because I don't really think that this is of interest here. The gun bridge in fact is also delivered with an autoloader, and to which we'll come just in a moment. So the armor on this tank has huge gaps, and there are some strong points that can absorb some damage that comes in, but further than this, it's not really this tank's strength. And for showing off one of these strengths of the tank, we'll have to look at the mobility. When it comes to the power output of the Leclerc Serie 1's engine, it is with 1474 horsepower, not the best, but very close to the upper limit. The weight with 53.7 tons is far from being the heaviest, but it's not really the lightest either, kind of average. But this fine equilibrium of stats delivers a very nice 27.4 horsepower per ton, and that is not really that far off from the TATU, but it is really only surpassed by the Type 90s, but only with just approaching 6%. On the other hand, the top speed with 71 km per hour is also excellent, as well as the 38 km per hour backwards. While every single stat is not the best in this comparison, it really flies across the battlefield if you let it run in a straight line, and reaching the top speed of 71 km per hour is not only achievable on paved road, but sometimes even under the right conditions on medium terrain. So the tank feels really mobile, and together with the neutral steering, it just takes a few seconds for the engine to rev up and to deliver full power. So the ground pressure also seems to be in this tank's favor, and that is where in the long run you can gain an advantage over your opponents. When you're stuck, on the other hand, you kind of feel the disadvantages again, and then versus all the other tanks with their fully upgraded engines, you are not in an advantageous position, but that is nothing new at top tier. So the mobility is certainly a strength of this tank, and this is why I actually played from a positioning standpoint more like a light tank rather than a full-fledged out main battle tank, which also is reflected in the armor layout of this tank. When we now have to talk about the business end of the Leclerc Serie 1, the geared CN120-26 F1 cannon is in many aspects fairly average, but that is not a bad thing for a rank 7 10.0 battle rating main battle tank, because the caliber is fairly average with 120mm. Also the amount of shells with 40 may be here the lowest, but it is more than good enough for any sort of normal battle. In fact, as I said, 23 is good enough to empty the lower ammunition rack, And the reload is slap bang also as well in the middle between the very best with 5 seconds and 7.1 seconds being the worst with the TATU. And those 6.0 seconds are in fact down to the fact that we have here an autoloader, and that means that you always have those 6.0 seconds independently from your crew skills or the amount of crew left, which is a big contrast to the Challenger 2 that in fact has with 5.0 seconds a second faster reload or 16.7%, but can quickly lose this advantage if you don't have an expert crew or an ace crew. The crew is not fully trained and you already have received a hit, killing some of your crew or injuring this crew. And this is a massive advantage of an autoloader in the main battle tank meta. And while 30 degrees per second turret rotation speed and 8 degrees of gun depression are certainly not right there up with the golden standards of the likes of M1A1 and Ariete, it is certainly not bad and still very much usable, as well as the 20 degrees of gun elevation and 36.0 degrees per second elevation speed, which is significantly better than the 2.0, the 5.0 and the 4.0 degrees per second of the likes of TATU, Challenger 2 and Top 90 respectively. So the gun handling might not be the very best, but it's certainly not the worst, and it is definitely very useful and usable. When it comes to statistics, let's finally talk about the ammunition that this tank has access to, and those are only 2 different rounds. The first round is the stock OCC 120 G1 Heat FS, and that's the only stock round that this tank has, and with a penetration value of up to 600 millimeters of heat at any range and a muzzle velocity of 1100 meters per second, it is not per se bad, but for top tier it is not that very well lolpan user friendly, since a lot of tanks have either aero protection or their composite armor is strong enough to withstand that kind of penetration of Heat FS. It doesn't even reach the golden standards of stock Heat FS for Western main battle tanks of 650 millimeters of penetration. Now, Heat FS brings a lot of advantages with it, like for example the long range penetration values, also getting better blast and splash damage versus some lightly armored vehicles with them, and being enough to deal with them probably in one shot. But the negative sides are that you cannot really shoot through buildings and through fences and through bushes, and this tank doesn't have an additional 20mm to clear a pathway for the shell through said obstacles, so that is a clear disadvantage. But most gun breachers will succumb at this kind of penetration value anyways. The second shell type, the OFL 120F1, comes only as a tier 4 upgrade, and that means you kind of have a long upgrade way, much like the Type 90 or the M1A1. On the other hand, therefore, you are then rewarded with the second strongest AP FSTS in the game, and that is in fact delivering 528mm of penetration with a good positive normalization, with I think the best muzzle velocity in game with 1790 meters per second. This shell is excellent, and it has also some good post penetration damage effect, as well as just the ability to punch through almost any armor, and if then it actually bounces off that armor, very often it always digs into the gun breach of enemy tank, or at least jams the turret ring. So this shell is actually worth the grind or the golden eagles that you invest in them, and when you fire a single shell it is actually not that expensive, with 610 silver lines, which is fairly acceptable, especially for top tier. So finally, let's summarize this tank and let's come to a verdict, to a conclusion, if it is worth it or not. The first thing that is really outstanding, like with the Type 90 and the M1A1, when fully upgraded they have really great performance, but the way to getting fully upgraded is a long one, and especially that all those tanks rely on good mobility. Well, that takes a few upgrades here and there, as well as a good trained crew. Likewise with going to the tier 4 AP FSDS, and dealing with the stock Heat FS is a challenge. So when the tank is fully upgraded, it is really enjoyable to drive. But the stock experience is quite frustrating, so either way you pay the tribute with tears or with golden eagles. That's just how it is. Those are the rules of top tier. The problem of the stock grind is further amplified by the lack of armor and or consistent armor, and also the lack of an additional heavy machine gun and or additional 20mm to further threaten helicopters. And while there were some nice clips where I very effectively laser rangefinded them and shot them down with APFSDS, it's not that easy with HeatFS. And again, if you miss the HeatFS, 6 seconds can be all that it takes for a helicopter to get over your firing arcs and also insert an ATGM into you and cripple you. So both good and bad sides are here very much noticeable. Now, when it comes to the experience, when it is fully upgraded, yes, the tank is very nice to play. It has the advantage. Speed and gun handling is everything, in which both this tank excels. On the other hand, once you lose this tank, you do not really have a good backup. First of all, the MX-40, also a very essential high tier main battle tank in its, well, good performing roles, again of mobility and also firepower, also has a very strong stock grind and lacks armor. So there you have it as well. And then after that, nothing is left. The Roland 1 is an SPA that is not really dealing all that well with enemy tanks, and the AMX-30B2 Brennus doesn't have a stabilizer as the next 8.7. And to argue here with a premium tank, the AMX-30 Super, to bring it into a battle rating where it has to punch above its weight is arguably not the strongest argument that there is. Now here you can see the result, that you actually can make a profit with this tank despite running the top tier, well, APFSDS. Let's now talk about this battle, and I want to talk you through this Syphon Signal battle and just look at this tank go from the very start. And while I do not really think that the tank is by itself a very good looking tank, I'm absolutely digging this camouflage here that, well, is always really nice to look at and on any sort of French tank. This forward camouflage is really something special, and I happily invested the 200 golden eagles to get it immediately. With the stock camouflage, it doesn't really look all that great. Now look at the speed over the terrain, over the sand, which is essentially medium terrain. It just pulls away. It just accelerates really nicely. We can reach top speed of 60 kilometers per hour. And that very often gives you the advantage to get into cover, to flank around unseen. And look, I'm already reaching here this ditch unchallenged. And also I think that a helicopter doesn't necessarily expect me here there if I manage to get under his radar, if you will. And now in this ditch I can cross across the map essentially to work around A, hopefully. So that was my initial plan. I was pretty lucky that I was completely unchallenged from this side and not a single enemy tank spawned on the F2 spawn, and everybody spawned on the F5 spawn. So they all went to the hills, they all ran to the hills, except one near A, and he is already engaged by the rest of my team. You can see it's all on this 6 line on this map, which makes me a little bit sad because it has so much more to offer, much like, for example, Kursk or Fulda Gap, etc. But nobody ever goes there, so even if you go there, there is nobody to engage. And that automatically, with that genius map layout at the hands of Gaijin, makes me, well, a spawn camper. The thing is, if I go out of this ditch, there are not that many places where I can actually go. And so I have this rock formation now inside, and I think to myself, well, I have to go there to hopefully be then in somewhat of cover from aircraft, or at least can hide behind those rocks if an enemy aircraft is coming after me, and hopefully I can snipe it. At least that's my, well, best choice. Being in the open versus aircraft is never a good thing. And also I have to cover this, well, kind of stretch of open ground hoping that there is no camper on the enemy team. And that is always a problem. Nobody expects you here. So again, I used the amazing mobility, and now I have all the time in the world to range find and get a properly aimed shot into this enemy, creating a one shot, which is always nice on the enemy IPM1. And well, now I look for tanks that I can easily shoot from this side, where my team might have some problems engaging them. Slowly I'm crawling forward, and the next candidate is there, and we have another winner in the one-shot lottery. Where is the next one? There is something moving. That was a bad shot. I actually aimed too high, and the next shot on this Sheridan goes right through the front, creating a hull break by hitting the gun breech. So, triple strike, just like that. Quick, easy, and dirty. And you can argue that this was spawn camping, but in fact it wasn't. The thing that I'm about to do right now, that might be considered spawn camping, but hey, what other choice do I have? On the move, removing an ADATS, that's always balanced. And that was a multi-strike times 4. Yes, that's just how it is. And in War and Love, everything is allowed. There are no rules or something like this. And that's the way that I play on this map. And yeah, this tank needs open maps. It needs room to maneuver. It needs to flank the enemy. That's what it's good at. Enemy main battle tanks are not bad at this either, but they're mostly relying on armor and then get gun breached either way. So I think that again this tank just boils down to being the essential main battle tank. If everybody shoots your main gun breach anyway, and despite all the armor that any sort of tank might have there, it gets damaged either way, why have any sort of armor there anyway? Well, as you saw in some clips before, even then some infantry fighting vehicles or some autocannons from SBAs in general can damage this as well. And again, you have no 20mm or heavy machine gun to then deal with them or even mark them very often. So now I saw that there was somebody coming after me. Unsurprisingly, somebody wanted to go for their revenge kill, clear the site after they missed doing this initially. And he was stopped by my team, because if you want to make a play, there are always campers, there are always helicopters to ruin your day. And just before I could clean him up, he was cleaned up by the rest of my team, despite his best smoke efforts. Again, scanning here the horizon, and I see nothing, which is both a good sign and a bad sign. In this match, my team and me, we kind of ruffle stomped the enemy team. And yeah, that was just something that I wanted to show you, that with the right approach, the tank really pulls off some amazing speeds on the straight line, where you can cover some distance, and then you are in a position where you can deal with the enemy and get in the easy side shots. So that makes practically the stock grind in this respect also less painful. But again, it involves then good shooting with the Heat FS. Again, I'm stationary here, and even if the enemy knows, or especially when they know I am here, then they cannot freely move across the open, again due to the map design, but also my sheer presence here, without me even being visible, without me even getting gun on target, force the enemy to invest resources into dealing with me, either with aircraft or with tanks flanking. And then those aircraft might be vulnerable to radar-guided SPA, and or also the tanks that try to flank here around are then in the open, and they can get easily shut up, especially also again with side shots by my teammates. And that was now the last kill for this match, and that was the ace. And there you can see, a few minutes later, the match indeed ended in total victory for our team, and I got in fact a Survivor award. Sadly, no helicopters were harmed in this last gameplay, but I hope I served the helicopter death god a lot earlier. So, results: 34,000 civil lines and 5,200 vehicle research points. It's always a great result. And again, I was only third in team, but I didn't use an aircraft and I didn't cap a point. So I really like this tank, and I hope you like this review of it. If so, please give it a like. Subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the waves, in the skies, and on the battlefields of War Thunder.